Hey guys, what's going on? I just wanted to let you guys know that this video that you're about to watch, I've done some commentary on top of it. It's not necessarily like crazy or anything, but it's basically 6 hours of footage that I just wanted to pare down to a very small time lapse. But I'm not usually a fan of time lapses, so decided to do some voiceover on top of it. We'll basically be looking at how I built some of the parts on this guy, and yeah. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you guys. I'll see you guys later. Okay, so you can see the concept on the left. I'm using Pure Ref for that, and I'm always having it on top. You can achieve always on top with Control Shift A. Right now, I'm just kind of building out the rooftop area, at least the blocking out of it. The details that are on top of the roof, I want to make sure are at least present in the blockout also. Just making sure that there's this ventilation and the little smokestack looking shapes. You'll see that I go to top view and side view quite often, and it's just to make sure that I'm aligning with the way that the shapes are being perceived in three-dimensional space. It's like you have to make sure that the roof is not overhanging too much on one side versus the other side. There's also those really long rib shapes that are on the roof itself. I need to make sure that those are in the blockout. You can see once those are in place, I can again check where those radiator looking things or ventilation things on the top need to be positioned and how long and wide they are. Everything is referenced to scale. Relative scale is what you should definitely be paying attention to when you're doing these blockout stages. It's really, really important that everything looks relatively correct to the piece next to it, especially when you're looking at it in concept. Just remember that concept is not always perfect and scale can kind of be a little skewed at the same time. So it's just a matter of practice to get used to this. So here I'm starting to extend the length of the building, and I started doing this little cutout piece here that matches the concept you can see on the left side. I wouldn't actually advise, now that I've looked at this, I wouldn't advise actually extruding it out like this. It could just be a piece that's shoved into the building itself. It doesn't need to be one continuous piece. That being said, it's just how I ended up doing it in the moment. One thing I should state is that n-gons, or like more than four-sided polygons, are totally okay in these blockout stages. And usually they're only an issue when you're in a game engine. Occasionally you'll run into issues as well when you're rendering. But it's always better to triangulate it yourself if you want to guarantee the triangulations occur where you want them to occur. Now you can see I'm figuring out where like the windows are going to go, just relative to the length of the building and where they're at in the concept, how many there are, and kind of their size. Over time, you'll see that I end up extending it further and further and just trying to figure out like where things are going to go. Nothing's ever right the first time, and that's totally okay. Now, one quick thing I want to say is there isn't really any plans to completely finish this building. And the main reason for starting this is it gave me a lot of challenges for figuring out how to use Blender. This is probably the first like couple of days of using Blender. Once I get the hang of it, we're going to be definitely moving into making an actual scene, either in Blender or finalizing inside of Unreal. Here I'm just doing a block out of what looks like little radiators or some type of AC unit on the side here. They're more unique than the other ones, but I just want to make sure that they're relatively accurate in their representation, even in the block out. I actually run into a bunch of horrible little like geometry issues with this AC unit thing. It's all a learning process. So on the second floor, there's a bit of a walkway. I don't know if you can see it in the concept from this view, but there's a little bit of a walkway that's kind of covered up by some metal sheeting. We'll just start building that area out and see where it takes us. Now this little bit of geometry cleanup that I end up doing here, it's really weird, and also like kind of proves like why you shouldn't be trying to build it into the mesh, like, or having it all be one piece. It doesn't need to be. So much easier to work with if everything is just kind of separated. You can always merge it together later if you need to. Now the spacing of the windows on the bottom floor here, I could have used like an array to evenly place those out, but I kind of like the idea of them being placed by hand like that, because then they tend to give a little bit more of a natural positioning. It's like a little bit more organic, if you will. Now, because we're not planning on building this in like a game engine or anything like this, or unwrapping or texturing any of it, duplicating these shapes is kind of the way I'm just going to go about it. Mainly just practicing modeling. Now, building out that second floor, there's a lot of like metal sheeting and cables and wires and such. Let's see how we solve that. Now what you'll see me doing here is I actually just kind of decide to build all the pieces out and position them kind of how I'm seeing it in the concept. And then I can take those and scale them as like their own group later in order to just kind of maintain what I think you would call like a micro composition. So it's like this cluster. They have a very specific layout to which they're interacting with each other. And then I just can place that around like I was saying. You can see now that they're like the little group has been made, I can scale it and position it how I want. It's much easier to work this way, for me at least. Here I'm basically trying to adjust the gap that's under those sheets so that I can kind of match it closer to the concept. At this point, I'm just going to start building out the next floor up, just getting all those little details in there. Since doing this recording, I actually wouldn't suggest doing these smaller bevels. I'd probably just stick it in there with modifiers. Now these metal sheets, I'm going to add all these extra cuts that are on the mesh itself, and it's just so I can deform it a lot easier. The soft selection, or the way that it works in Blender, I really, really like. Just pressing O turns it on, and then when you start to move things, you'll get a ring around the mouse pointer. And that ring, you can scroll up and down in order to change essentially the radius of the soft select. It's really nice. So at this point, I start blocking out what I think is a little bit of like a power box. It's got like a little display thing in the middle, like a round circular display. And then it's got these cables that are kind of running out of it, and they're going behind the metal covering. Now, some of the details I end up adding here are more about exercise for me versus like actual blockout phase. The details are just getting a little bit higher than they should probably, for a blockout at least. But here's the splines. Now, the splines, or the curves, you want to call them curves, I really like in Blender. They kind of bring back the joy that I used to have that I missed from 3ds Max. Before Blender, I was a Modo user, and before Modo, I was 3ds Max. And after switching to Modo, I was always missing the splines of 3ds Max. Now in Blender, I'm getting kind of the best of both worlds, as I'm using a lot of the controls of Modo, but I'm getting all the benefits that I've been missing out on for a long time with 3ds Max. Now, one thing that's really nice, just to splurge a little bit more about the splines in Blender, is they kind of act like meshes, so you can still join them, which is really, really nice. So if you place a cable out, you can just select it and Shift-E to dupe it and move it around, and then select both of them later and then combine it again with the Control J. Now that giant menu that you see me keep pulling up, that one's just like Machine Tools, which is a free add-on by Machine. It's not necessarily adding anything new to Blender, but it's making them a little bit more easy to get to or more accessible. And here we are adjusting the scale of everything again, because it's never exactly where it should be. Occasionally I catch myself going to the other side of the building and I'm like, oh, I need to fix this, or I need to adjust that. It's kind of just, it's good to back up every once in a while and just kind of look at the overall image, because maybe you'll catch something that you were missing before. Now with the fourth floor, you can tell that I start making much larger shape changes, which is probably what you should be doing in the initial block out of something. You got to get those broad shapes out, broad strokes, right? So the main elements on this next floor up are a lot of metal overhangs and wood beams holding them up, followed by like a railing of the same type of metal surface. You see I just dupe a beam off from wherever it was built before, which has its upsides and its downsides. Upside being I don't have to sit there and make one real quick, but downside being sometimes it'll have like some rotational information already kind of built into it, and I'm gonna have to like manually sit there and straighten it out and whatnot, which can be time consuming depending. Is that notorious soft select working out again? Oh man, I love it. It's good stuff. Now getting these beams to lean around in different angles kind of really helps the overall kind of feeling that you get from them. It's a tangent I get into every once in a while, and it's basically like your art can look very three-dimensional or gamey or 3D when things are very rigid or straight, right? So like any type of tilt or angle or shift in the shape, even if it's a straight shape, is just going to be much more visually interesting and not so like jarring or off-putting when it comes to, oh, is that 3D, or oh, that looks interesting. So I extend the floor out a little bit further, and then I start adding what looks like this older support beam. I'm curious, is like I don't, when you look at the concept, it's not really sure like what it is or like how. Yeah, it's weird. I don't know what it is. It looks old and broken, so it must have been there from a while back. So near the top floor again, we have what looks like either some type of AC unit or I don't know, some type of unit. Anyways, spline work, gotta love it. And you see how much control you end up having over it, and just being able to dupe it off and skew it around and change it. It's it's nice. It's like playing with clay. Make sure to get all those represented shapes on the roof. All right, so at this point, I think I'm shifting focus to kind of look at one of these windows and just kind of figure out what they're going to be, like how this is going to be put together. And I think with this certain approach, this one way of doing it is essentially I want to make like an inset piece that I can snap to the building shape itself. So I can just make a hole later and then just snap the frame in. This is kind of frustrating to watch. It's like I couldn't figure out how the snapping worked. I got it now, but yeah, it's I was like, what the hell's going on? So I'm stealing some other shapes from previous windows just for continuity's sake. It'll make sure that the windows kind of look like they're coming from the same construction company or building company. Just lots of fudging around until I get it to look the way I'm liking. So here I'm just kind of building out the frame for the window. I'm just thinking about it in two pieces, as if like one piece can be slid up later to like open for air. So now that I've got that window done, I go ahead and just kind of dupe the that wall piece next to itself so that I can have like the little window shape in order to snap into. You can see, just kind of getting everything into place. And talk about having the windows being cohesive. It's like, now that I built these out, why don't I just dupe them and put them in the other window frames as well? So here I'm not really sure what happened. I think I must have been distracted or something, and I was just like, oh, I need to start building a bottom floor, and I start straightening all the base out and all that stuff. Oh right, I think I realized that the building looked a little too short, and so I started extending it, which has like a knock-on effect for all the other details. So there's some adjustments that needed to happen. Yeah, as you can see, like the bottom floor just wasn't big enough. Once I add that shape in there, there wasn't enough room for anything else. Now in this cloth like overhang thing for the windows, you'll notice that I start thickening them using a modifier called Solidify. Actually does wonders for being able to iterate on these type of shapes without being destructive. I'm guessing this object on the ground that I'm about to block out is more of like a generator. For extruding outwards like that, I started using inset, but then instead of insetting the shape, you hold down control once you've triggered it. And then if you move your mouse, you're extruding out by the normal of the faces that are selected. It's really useful. It looks like we're back up to the roof, fixing some scale issues, and then getting onto like the smaller details that are on there. At this point, I'm like, okay, I need to actually make this window inset. And what better way to do it than to actually build a room? So someone during the stream was actually asking about like adding those details that are believable, and then I went ahead and showed them like by building pieces like this bracket here, it really helps like solidify how things are connected together versus just floating geometry on top of itself. Those are the things you want to watch out for. Anything you can add that's like this is going to like push the quality just that much further up. All right, we'll just continue blocking out all the shapes that are on the rooftop area here. A lot of times it's just boxes, trying to make sure everything just kind of feels right position-wise. Now kind of moving on to the second floor from the top. There's this inset area, which is actually pretty interesting shape-wise compared to the rest of the building. It's almost more of like a key element to the building itself. I just start working on like how to cut a hole out for this window, position the window, and then start kind of adding the details that I'm expecting to see for the shape of the building. You can see in the concept that there's quite a bit of details that are happening around that area. Some scaffolding on the left side, and then some more windows and possibly an inset on the the underside of the overall inset. So I add a cut here, and then you can see I select everything in kind of like a fast way. If you don't know, you can control click from face to face, and it will try to find the shortest route to that face while adding to the selection. Super handy. For anyone who's made it this far, I appreciate you guys hanging out. Doing a time lapse, I've never really been a fan of them just because they don't necessarily give you much information. So I wanted to put some type of voiceover on top of it. Well, I can't voice over the whole thing. I want to make sure that you guys get something out of it versus just some time lapse video. So thanks for hanging out. All right, now we get on to blocking out some of the major shapes on the rooftop. This area is really kind of confusing just because there's not really a good view of what's happening up there. So you just kind of have to make it up and try and lock down the main shapes and just rely on those to kind of get you there. So this is where it can kind of get a little weird because the concept doesn't really show you much, and you'll run into this problem where you're seeing a lot of detail on the top, and you're seeing how far it goes back, but it doesn't really make sense with how much information you can actually fit up there. So I start having to solve the size of the building on the back and like how far it actually goes back and what the rooftop size might actually be. It gets really weird, but I think I come to an area where I'm like, all right, no, this feels right. Yeah, you can see this back, like especially when you look at the from the side view, it's not deep enough. So it's like, okay, if these floors need to support each other and the amount of information on the top, I basically go, okay, make the top as big as it's supposed to be based off of what I'm seeing in the concept. Assume that's the size, and then build all the floors below it to match in order to support it from a weight physics standpoint. Because at the end of the day, as long as it's matching physically to look like it could do it, then you're in a good spot. You notice I ended up going down to the bottom floor again, and I think it's because like I wasn't in the mood to sit there and solve the rooftops very much, so I kind of got to where I felt was okay, and then I moved on to somewhere else. Just remember, you don't have to be stuck somewhere and have to do something. You can hop around. So this part I'm building right now, it's like not necessarily in the concept, the wood structural part under the metal, but it kind of needs to be there in order to hold it up, right? So it's more about like making sure it realistically is just going to work. I had like a smoother detail in the roofing here as well, just to kind of give your eyes something to look at based off of all that noisy detail. Just need something to rest your eyes on, you know? There's some nudging, compositional nudging, trying to get everything into a nice position based off of concept, of course. So at this point, I dupe the cables off from the top because I know that there's some like piping that goes through these two units, and so I just go about building that out. Now I could do this with like converting like an edge selection into a spline and then adding thickness from there, but I wanted the kind of organic, kind of bent feel to it, and I don't know, I just like the look that I'm getting off of a spline versus that. It's all taste, I guess. You can see the corner here is just not looking very strong, and then I realized that there's supposed to be a little bit of a pillar here. Gotta add those little sci-fi shapes, you know? So this part's weird. I need to bevel this edge, but I don't know the size of the bevel from the other edge, so I just take the edges on the other side, dupe them over, and then use it as kind of like an eyeball reference, just to match it as close as possible. So I notice here in the bottom floor that this actually isn't sticking out far enough to match the scale of everything, so I just kind of start skewing things in order to make it work. Um, yeah, delete one of those just so I don't get as much of a stretch effect on the surfaces, and then just kind of match it all up. After that, I just kind of make sure that I'm blocking out all the like primary shapes that are on the ground area. It's like little bin thing here with some metal parts, it looks like. Now, next up is this corner piece, which is kind of crazy. So I'm trying to figure out how to make these, like, how do you make it round? And I think in the concept, now that I'm looking at it, it's probably more square, and there's just an opening above. But I tried my best to round it out. Yeah, it definitely takes some noodling. Like, I'll get there though. Soft select to save the day. All right, now to build the supports. I try and keep the support straight just because, I mean, of course they're not going to be sitting there bending wood to make it work. They're probably going to use the same shapes in the construction phase and try and just make it round with what they have. Okay, at this point I'm like, okay, there's like a shop door entrance area here, and I need to figure out like how this is all set up. I start with the overhangs on the left and right, but then quickly realize that I need to also make it round. And the rounding of it also lets me know that the shape of the building isn't like a 90-degree turn. It's more cut in, especially with the doors being there at the bottom. It's definitely more of like a 45-degree angle. Looking at this again, I probably would have just did a mirror on a 45 and then did a bevel and then just adjusted those on modifiers instead of sitting here trying to manually do it. Just because you don't get the flexibility to change it later, you know? Yeah, this is where I realized that the building, you can see how the building's cutting into the curve. It's like, okay, that can't actually be like that. The building needs to go back, I think. And there's those irregularity shifts I was telling you guys about. Just breaking up those geometric edges. All right, so giving the building a bit of a once over with my eyes, trying to see like where shapes are at and how things are kind of starting to rest down on themselves. Then the immediate problem is visible, and it's that the length in the back. Like now I need to solve this. If I can't solve this part, then the whole building's just not going to feel right. You can see the knock-on effect this has too, and this is because I didn't focus on the larger shapes before starting to get those smaller details. So now I have to shift these smaller details around and just kind of figure out how everything's going to align and rebuilding the composition of propping and just where stuff is in relation to the other stuff. Like all the parts need to line up again. It's kind of annoying. Make sure you get your big blockouts figured out first. Lessons be learned. All right, here we go. I'm going to figure out this doorway entrance area. So I need the top part of the building to still be a 90-degree turn with this nice wide bevel on it. But I think I'm going to essentially take most of the base of this and just kind of boolean out the building itself. And then I'll figure out what happens behind it in order to make this work. Yeah, already that's feeling way better. It may not be wide enough yet, but I think we have our answer. See now, since changing the width of the building, I now need to adjust these cables and kind of realign stuff and make sure things are scaled correctly. Lots of noodling, tweaking, adjustments. This bottom corner of the building is a can of worms I'm not really ready to open up, but I gotta do it eventually, right? So cleaning up the base of the building a little bit more, I was trying to make that face a bit wider. Then I also need to start cutting out the next set of windows. I could have Boolean these out, but I needed these cuts anyway, so I'm just like, whatever, I'll just cut it. Now that we have those holes in place, it's definitely time to replace those old blockout windows with something a little bit more fancy. So in this part, you'll actually see me select edges and then create a pipe off of it, a spline. And that's just an add-on called Quick Pipe. So basically I just set up these edges here, select that, and then Control E to get in the contextual menu for edges, and then you'll see Quick Pipe just in the drop-down list. The adjustments based off building width continue. All right, so we need to make this side wider. And so I just start moving it along the edge here to just widen out that face. It's pretty easy if you press the move key twice. It'll just follow the geometry of the previous edges that are connected to it. So using the wall as a reference point, I dupe it out and then start building the door frame for it from there. Don't want to make it overly complicated, but I need you to be able to go, oh yeah, no, that's a door. Those are doors. All right. Using the quick pipe again, I'll make the handles. You see, now that that door's in place, and the scale of these giant banners or whatever they are need to be much larger. Okay, from here I'm like, okay, it's time to make the crazy mess that is all of those little power boxes and cables and wires and such. Time to make them. I'll just start with the initial block out of them, and then we'll figure it out after that. Now you see I'm placing them in here after they've been blocked out, and now looking back at it, I wouldn't suggest doing it this way, just because the sheer sense of dealing with objects that are on angles like this is just a pain. When what you can do is just keep them pretty straight and in their origin in a separate collection, and then reference that collection into this Blender file, and then put all the rotations on that collection reference instead. So then you can still edit your the prop afterwards in its origin without all the crazy rotations applied to it. Much easier to work with. We're reaching the tail end of this time lapse, but I just want to thank everyone for coming by and watching it. If you got this far, I super appreciate it. Feel free to leave any comments or questions in the video, and I'll make sure to respond to them. So there's these smaller boxes with like wires and stuff that are really close to the wall. They're like kind of stapled down, if you will. So we're gonna start adding those little details. We're gonna add the little like I don't even know what they are, like little light boxes or power boxes, and then start placing all the wires in them. Now doing these splines, you can actually have it snap to the face that you're drawing to, which makes it pretty fun to just kind of run wires along the surface of a wall. You'll see it here in a second. So you can see I can just draw each point and just kind of have it snap to the face. It's really useful. But yeah, that's basically the time lapse. There's not too much else to this. If you have any questions or anything, just throw them down in the comments below. Don't forget to sub to our channel. We're pushing really hard to try and make some content that is useful to you guys. So cheers, and thanks for chilling.